Okay, so can I start?
Yeah, you can.
Alrighty. So today's going to be kind of a show and tell about the complexes. We're going to have a lot to go through. So a lot of times in my talks, I encourage dialogue. Today I'm going to say hold off. If you have a question, by all means, you don't understand something, please ask it. But let's save the dialogue until the end so that we can get through everything, because as with a good story, the ending is where all the really cool stuff is. And I want
It's a happy one.
we shall see. Okay, so starting way back with dear Siggy, these are kind of the three people that we associate with complexes. Sigmund Freud, of course, the Oedipus complex. He didn't publish the term complex, but he described in 1899 in the Interpretation of Dreams the Oedipus myth, where he does talk about his observations that children, normal children even, have this tendency to fall in love with the opposite sex parents and hate the same sex parent. And he related that back to the Oedipus myth. He said that psychoneurotics just have a magnified scale of feelings. So the Oedipus story, which you all probably know, is kind of, like a tale of fate and fulfilling one's wishes. But it did do more than that. It kind of laid the groundwork for Jung's notion of complexes, in that there's a set of circumstances in childhood which one forgets about by adulthood, but then finds oneself reenacting those wishes from childhood, even as one tries not to. So Freud's main point was that these sexual wishes submerge into the unconscious. Freud actually didn't publish the term complex until 1910 in an article called Contributions to the Psychology of Love. I guess who is probably involved with that one. Now Bleuler, who was Jung's boss, the director of the Bergoldsli, he kind of took up the Freudian approach, but he was a bit of an agnostic. He was an early adopter, but he wasn't real keen on this, the sex is at the bottom of everything. Possibly because at the Bergoldsli, he saw a wider variety of patients than Freud did. Freud was pretty much hung out his shingle in Vienna in private practice, whereas at the Bergoldsli, they got a wide variety of people from all walks of life. So they saw probably more pathologies. It was kind of difficult to find quotes, like when Bleuler published this, probably in his Dementia Precox book. But already from this little quip from Google Books, you can see that he's talking about the complex's function in the unconscious. And so he and Jung probably worked together to develop it there. The work on the complexes is what initially brought Freud and Jung together. Jung published it in his Diagnostische Assoziationsstudien, the Diagnostic Association Studies in 1910, which, where's my pile of books here? Okay, practically this whole thing are his association studies. They're really boring to read. But here they are.
Which volume is that?
2. Yeah. In doing the association studies, Jung saw that indeed we all have complexes, and we all have a variety of different types of complexes, not just, an Oedipus complex. And that they are the what am I trying to say here? The unconscious is getting in the way of one's conscious, easy processing. We're going to look at that directly, but let me just go on a little bit of a diversion, because I was really trying to find who said it first, who published complex first, and it was not. I didn't find it out. I was led down a variety of rabbit holes. A lot of people said Jung published it first. This was published in 1910. Another one of the Wikipedia articles said that this guy, Theodor Ziehen, used it first, that he was conducting association studies also. Well, I couldn't confirm that, but I did learn that Nietzsche was a patient of his. So, what are the association studies that Jung was doing? Okay, come on, computer. I pulled a clip from A Dangerous Method, where it shows Jung actually doing that. I think the computer is trying to load it from YouTube right now. It's not going forward.
And this is all around 1910?
It started earlier, yeah, because Freud and Jung were talking, in 1904, 1905, and they didn't. Both of them basically published the complex, the idea of the complex, in 1910, and then by about 1913 they had split up. Oh, another sort of interesting thing is the way the complex was kind of playing them. So if you think about, the Oedipus myth and the father, or, father and son did not know that they were father and son, Laius and Oedipus, when they met on the road and Oedipus kills Laius. He did not know that he was his father. And in some way, Freud saw Jung as his son, and, Jung did not want to be, seen as the son. He wanted to be seen as an equal, and kind of killed the father. It's in this clip, Jung is conducting this word association test with basically his wife Emma as the subject. And she's hooked up to, an early galvanometer, which is skin conductance. It, reveals a certain level of anxiety. He is timing how quickly she is responding to the creating the associated word. And then he's got Sabina Spielrein also measuring something. I'm not exactly sure what it is. But the idea is that the longer it takes for you to associate one word with whatever you associate it with, and also in the studies, he found that the ability to recall the word that you associated was indicative of a complex being operative. So if you can't recall the word that you associated with the other word, there's a complex there. If it takes longer, there's a complex there. So what exactly did Jung discover in those experiments? He discovered access, well, he might not have. Freud definitely, and Bleuler too. Discovered access to a realm that's not in the control of the conscious mind. Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. Jung said that the complexes were. He discovered a connection between the feeling tones or emotional charges that the complexes carry and meaning. So words have their dictionary meanings, but people also have personal meanings and personal associations and, values and feelings and all these other layers of that go along with the meaning of a word. Mother to me means a very different thing than mother to John. He discovered a source of the patterns in our behaviors and experiences. We'll get to that in the next slide. And complexes are as much a part of normal psychology as they are pathology. The central characteristic of our psyche, he determined, was the ego complex, and then other complexes can act almost autonomously and be in competition with the ego complex. So the structure of the complex is there's a nuclear element. It can be likened to like a nested system that contains subsystems. The nuclear element has an emotional energy charge. He says we can estimate this quantum of energy in various ways, from the relative number of constellations. So you could have, a bunch more constellations where the constellation is where it ends up manifesting in your behavior, in your life. Something can trigger it and constellate a whole behavior pattern that, normally your ego wouldn't necessarily do. I'll give you some examples from my own life in a bit. And number 3, from the intensity of the accompanying affects. Okay, so the nuclear element is kind of, innate, internal. The constellations are factors determined by experience. Now, the nuclear element can also be characterized a little more, with more detail, in that later on, not in the early work, but later, he noticed that there's often an archetypal component to the nuclear element, and it also comes with images, emotions, symbols that people relate to it as well. Those usually come out during therapy, not during life. The constellations happen like during life. The images and symbols during therapy. Okay, so let me give you an example from my own life of what one of my favorite complexes looks like. So if somebody that I'm close to, intimate with, suddenly goes quiet on me, I panic. I literally have this panic response. And I've identified how this complex kind of got imprinted. When I was a kid, my mother tended to repress her anger. And so if I did something that, she got angry with me about, she wouldn't, calmly say, Lisa, that really upset me. Instead, she would give me the silent treatment. And then months, sometimes even years later, there would be something I would say or do, and she could now not contain her anger anymore, and it would just erupt all over the place from something really innocuous. And eventually, I started connecting the dots, oh, okay, if she were a poker player, her silent treatment would be her tell. That's her tell that she's angry with me. And, then I could say, well, okay, Mom, why are you angry? What are you angry about? And eventually, I brought this complex with me into my other intimate relationships. And whenever I got what I interpreted as the silent treatment, the first thing out of my mouth would be, why are you mad at me? And the answer was usually, I'm not mad at you. Why do you think I'm mad at you? And so it took quite a bit of work for me to go, okay, this person has their own stuff going on. They're not necessarily mad at me. I don't have to get all upset about, some silence between us.
Take a deep breath, please.
Thank you.
Let your mom leave the room.
Yeah. But, it kept constellating over and over and over. And mainly with, I would say, boyfriends more than with my female friends. Which is an interesting thing that I didn't project even though my mother was kind of at the core of it, I didn't project it onto other females. Other females didn't constellate it. And I think one of the reasons for that is because, of the types of complexes that in Volume 2 over there that Jung identified. One was the love complex. So money complex, erotic complex, that probably has a lot of the Freudian influence still. The love complex. And I think mine that I just described was the love complex because it was grounded in the fear of the loss of love. Where's the other book? This is another great book.
Love that one.
Say not a great book? Or
No, it is a great book. This is another great book that Yolanda Jacobi describes the complexes. We can pass that around.
And a great definition of archetype in there. she does a really great
Good
job
job.
of breaking that down, distilling it down.
Yeah,
I love that book.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she really takes a lot of like big opus of Jung's work and distills it into a very coherent presentation. Okay, so to summarize, to kind of bring all of this together and to bring Jung back into it here. So these are his words. He says the association immediately following that through which the complex has been constellated has an extended reaction time owing to the reverberation of the feeling tone. Another thing he says is that the only aspect of the complex appearing in the reaction was available. Only the aspect of the complex appearing in the reaction was available to consciousness. From these facts, it becomes evident that consciousness plays only a minor role in the process of association. And lastly, the feeling-toned complex, for the time being split off from consciousness, exercises an influence that constantly competes with the intentions of the ego complex. And we will get into that a little more. So this is just to show you that there are a wide variety of characters or qualities, amongst the archetypes that can constellate a complex. This particular, when I went looking for archetypes on, Google Images, this particular image just kept popping up over and over and over. It's become very popular in the marketing world of all places. Marketers are starting to say you gotta associate your brand with an archetype, and so these are the ones that seem to have gotten some
economic potential.
There you go. But we can recognize some, like Jester. What's one I'm thinking
Are
of?
there a limited number of these? Aren't there?
No, no. I mean, you can look at the tarot deck for other archetypes. You've got your martyr.
The person.
They what?
I guess I just think they merge out of the. It's not like you find this thing, but this thing that you find is.
Well, they're all in us. They're all in us. Some of them get constellated in various ways in certain people, according
I'm just
to.
wondering if they're there rather than a. It's like we have something like a, like a. Never mind. It's just.
Well, Jung says the complex relates to consciousness in the same way the archetype to personal consciousness, in the same way the archetype relates to collective unconsciousness. So that's a significant distinction.
So it's a personalization of it, in a sense.
So,
Yeah.
if I may,
Yeah.
the relationship between the complex and the constellation, is the constellation a manifestation of a pattern, or is it a discrete event? I was confused.
It's something that comes out in behavior. We'll see some constellations. I have some clips, some film clips, not YouTube. These are actually right here on my flash drive. Oh, and you can get your free personalized. I mean, there's a lot of marketing going on here with archetypes.
I think Thomas More said it. He said that a little girl when she's 3 years old, her mother tells her she has a horrible voice, and she's 35 and she's quiet and impish and doesn't talk. And it goes back to that. And much like a hurricane, she spent 32 years sustaining it as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sustain a complex in order for it to survive. And I'm talking from a scientific perspective. Complexity breeds in patterns. And it's kind of the same with the mind. I mean, that's how Moore put it. I thought it was brilliant.
There's a, so you bring up a good point, which is that it's not just like an archetype, but there's some kind of wounding or secret that also helps to sustain the pattern. And it's often that wounding that gets submerged into the unconscious and tries to manifest itself. Let me just...
The chaos theorists would say that's the butterfly.
We're getting there.
Well,
So let me just read a little more Jung to you. I think helps to clarify this. A complex would not be a complex at all if it did not possess a certain, even a considerable affective intensity. One would expect that the energic value would automatically force the complex into consciousness. So it has a lot of energy. The energy would like burst it into consciousness. But Jung says that this is frequently not the case. That the readiest explanation is given by Freud's theory of repression. This theory presupposes a counterposition in the conscious mind. The conscious attitude is hostile to the unconscious complex and does not allow it to reach consciousness. So this suggests a kind of a paradox. The complex reveals certain unconscious contents that are not under conscious control, and yet the energy with which they are revealed suggests that they want to be brought into consciousness, but at the same time, the conscious mind does not want them to be known, does not want you, the carrier, to wake up to things that potentially are disturbing, that, are being repressed, things that perhaps you don't want to know about yourself.
They destabilize the persona, the effective ego stability, right? They undermine it. They're a threat to it.
Well, no, they're all part of it. They're all kind of working almost autonomously. The ego can want to maintain its stability, and the complexes can seem like they destabilize it, but sometimes those become sort of normal habitual behavior.
Maintenance, right.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
Addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any work done on how complexes in this regard are fed by like confirmation bias and other types of things? It's important to feed, or ignore. But
Yeah. I would say confirmation bias would be I have an example of that in a later slide. Let's watch just a couple clips. So these are from the movie Friends with Money. It's not a very well-known movie, which is why I picked it. It is about 4 women who, let me just find my description here. 4 friends who, became 4 women friends who became friends kind of long ago, and now, like 3 of them are married. 1 is still single. They all have a money complex, but that would be too easy, so I did not pick clips with their money complex. I picked primarily clips with one character whose name is Jane, played by Frances McDormand. Now, notice the feeling tone. Think about what might be the nuclear element, what might be the archetype, the wounding, the secret that is going on here in her life.
So, this guy is showing me his disgusting house, which clearly he's self-conscious about. Then he has the nerve to ask me to take less money.
What did you say?
I said, okay.
Why?
Because if this guy is so pathetic that he has to haggle with his cleaning lady, I should just do it. I mean, that guy's worse off than I am.
Or you are too scared to stick to your price. God, I don't understand how you can clean somebody else's toilet. I can barely touch my own.
You don't touch your own.
I know it.
Now let me ask you a question. What's going on with your hair?
Why, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, is that goop or is that just dirty?
No, I guess it's dirty.
Doesn't look good.
If I wash it too much, it dries it out. I don't want to talk about my hair anymore. I'm going to get a sample.
Jane?
Hey! Olivia, this is Maya.
Hi, Maya. How you doing? Your clothes are everywhere. My butt's in the darkness.
Yeah, we're doing well. Hey, congratulations, obviously. You had your baby.
Yeah.
Oh.
Jane, Olivia. This is Tom.
Oh. Tall?
Hi. Has the hardest time agreeing on a name.
What if it turns out short, Maya?
Oh. You know, we actually thought about that the other day. My husband is kind of short.
Well, he's young. You could always change him. You might not notice.
But we like the name. It's not tall, it's Tom.
Oh, it's Tao.
You know what? We have to go. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, congratulations, really. That was awful.
I couldn't take you anywhere. That was awful.
What are you so angry about lately? I'm not angry. Oh my God, aren't those the saddest looking plants you've ever seen?
No, you really are. I want to know what you're mad
Jesus,
about.
that's the fucker that flipped me off. Asshole.
Okay. You're not angry.
So she's got some stuff, right? And she's not conscious of it. Her friend can see it, but she's just like, no, I'm not angry.
You maybe because he thinks you're cute. He didn't even notice I was sitting here.
What are you talking about?
You are so blind. The waiter's like in love with you.
I'm a guy, and I'm with you.
I just want the check. It's like they were up your ass every 5 minutes to get your order. And when you need the check, they go out back and smoke a cigarette or something. Oh, here he is.
Everything was alright. Can I get you anything else?
Just a check.
Honey, that kiss on yours.
Yeah.
Don't you love that?
She doesn't look very good in it.
But it's
So she's a fashion designer.
Where's the waiter?
Okay, here's a fun one.
Wait, excuse me. I was next.
No, you weren't.
But you can't do that. Hey, I was waiting in line. It's not right.
Let me help them and then I'll help you.
Did you see that? Were they in front of me? No, this is crazy. I've been waiting in line. How important could being in front of me be?
Calm down,
No,
alright?
you really. What kind of person are you? Do you feel like you really got away with something? Is this really worth the heat?
I'm sorry, but could you just step over there and wait your turn? Seriously.
Is there a manager here? Is there a manager here?
I'm the manager. How can I help you? Is everything alright?
No, everything's not all right. I'm angry because these two people cut in line in front of me and everyone is letting them get away with it. Those two people with their stupid fucking faces.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave the store, man.
Me, you kick out, and to them you do nothing?
I'm sorry.
Just let me buy what I need.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, then, take it all
On top of it, I don't get.
So there you can see a really good example of some little thing that sets off a behavior pattern that is like way out of proportion to what the situation would call for if you're not being triggered by a complex.
I'll take the next customer.
Oops.
I would have just shot them.
Okay, so here it's like she can rationally explain things. Not
See,
quite.
There are a lot of things that are wrong and right. And as you get older, you try to figure out which one's a which. I mean, some are big and obvious, like don't kill anybody or hurt anybody on purpose. And some are trickier. And sometimes you do the wrong thing before you know you're doing the wrong thing. Do you want some of these? These are cute.
Like what?
Oh, I don't know. Okay, say you're taking a test and you don't know the answer. So you look at the guy's paper sitting next to you and you copy his answer.
That's bad, right?
Right, you should not do that. But while you're doing it, you're thinking to yourself, well, this doesn't hurt anybody. What difference does it make? Well, it does make a difference because those little things add up.
So, what you should
There
understand.
are a lot of injustices, a lot of things that aren't fair. And when people make it worse by doing the wrong things, like taking your parking space or cutting in front of you in line in a store, and then they're just making the world an uglier place.
Lisa, so would you say that she's got an anger complex or an inferiority complex or,
Yeah.
you know, how do you...
All of the above.
Yeah.
Well,
I'd say she has a practical view of the human species. Well, I mean, she
which
seems
is why we need
intelligent.
gun
She's just,
legislation.
you know, she,
So my questions were, what's the feeling tone? What's the archetype? What might be the wound or the secret?
Anger.
Definitely anger. There's a feeling, yeah.
Well, and the anger, she feels that she's being not treated correctly. That there's tremendous
Injustice.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a messiah complex that she's gonna right the wrongs of society, and she knows better than everybody else, and things like that too.
And she's going to do it by flipping him off, right?
And her wound is that she's been humiliated as a child or she's been humiliated?
Yeah, was that Jung's idea that this would be a trigger? There's something that happened to her in the past that she doesn't remember that is the cause of this?
Well, what's the archetype?
Yeah, let's look at I've got
you can't separate the butterfly from the hurricane.
There you go.
I've got just these two last scenes which start getting at, you know, kind of what's bugging her. Okay?
Thank you so much. It's just a little running. So sorry.
You should not apologize. He should be apologizing. You should order them over medium money. No. Then they come back dry. Always, especially here.
Oh, we've never been here actually.
Who picked it?
I did. I really like it. I really like it.
So Gretchen, what do you do?
Oh, we run the company together. Aaron's the artist and I'm pretty much the bookkeeper.
No.
I always give signs as presents.
Really?
I have for years.
So do we, but you can only give your wares away for so long and then you have to buy something.
Didn't I ask for coffee about an hour ago? Excuse me, can I have some more coffee? Fell off the face of the fucking earth. So what do you have to do? No, they only have one job to do, and I couldn't even do that right.
Jane,
What?
please.
What?
Will you not have one of your fits? I mean, we're having a really lovely time. Okay? Thank you so much.
Okay, and then this is where
Another cup of coffee. Was it really worth making us look like crazy people in front of our new friends? Just tell me, what horrible injustice was done to you that you have to act this way? What is it that you don't have that you have to, walk straight into a plate glass window? Or that you can't even get up the incentive to wash your fucking hair?
Wash my hair.
Yeah, when? Have you seen it recently? And just tell me, are you intending to go to the benefit thing looking like that?
Well, what's the point? It just gets dirty and you have to wash it all over again.
That's what civilized people do. They get up and they wash their hair. When it gets dirty, they wash it again.
Well, I don't want to.
Jesus! I mean, is this your idea of rebelling against the way
I'm not
things
rebelling
are?
against
Well, what are you
anybody.
doing?
I'm just tired.
Of what?
I just guess I feel like there's no more wondering what it's going to be like.
Like what's going to be like?
My fabulous life.
You don't like your life.
No, I do. I like my life.
Good.
okay. So there you can start getting to see that, you know, she's dissatisfied with like there's no excitement anymore. It's all blah, and she's afraid that this is the way life is going to be forever and ever, and she's taking it out on everybody around her. Any other questions?
I think from a
comments?
Jungian view, the preeminent archetypal pattern on display is the animus, the internal masculine who's trying to bring some order into her life and is insisting on moral principles, insisting on her own rightness about everything, judgmental, the judge.
The judge, yeah.
To get started.
Yeah,
I've got a list of
and
15
in that order, she's trying to create disorder because the hunt, like she misses the hunt of life, like being able to, like it sounds like she was a very successful type of person, right, in terms of business, and it was always the hunt, and now there's this
too much stability.
Yeah, and so through the order, she's actually trying to dismantle the world around her a little bit, so that there's something interesting about it.
I got the one that she wasn't being acknowledged as the way she should be. She wasn't being treated as like they ignored her on the copy. To me, it seemed as if to me that she was angry that she wasn't getting credit or attention or.
In some ways, that could be like the princess. Like, why isn't everybody waiting on me the way I expect them to be waiting on me? Damn it! They should have brought my.
From a wound where she didn't get treated as she should be, or
Probably.
You know, it's like she doesn't think she's a princess, but there's a part of her that is always going to keep projecting some incident where she was denied her own dignity, her own.
Something with the hair, though.
Yeah.
That personal. Well, there's something more going on. I mean, I think that's a symbol. There's something more going on for her than just sort of.
John, and why would why would the manifestation of the animus portray so much anger? Why would it be manifested with so much anger?
Well, the animus wouldn't necessarily be paired with anger. Again, all the archetypes are ambivalent. They have, they're like, the best, simplest metaphor is like batteries. There's to have an energy system of a battery, you've got to have a plus pole and a minus pole of that battery. So the archetypal patterns have plus minus energies. With all this complex work with Jung, it centers on psychic energy. So the animus is a major notion in Jungian psychology, as is the anima, but it is the inner opposite that is somehow in imbalance. Things are imbalanced. So we see, an inflation. If she is wounded, she has an inflated sense of how the whole world needs to somehow do better by her.
Mm-hmm.
And she may have very good grounds for that.
Yeah, unfortunately, the movie does not go into backstory. No.
Animus itself would be an organizing principle.
I agree with you. She comes across as being masculine. She's walking
Which is
down the street
that's
with
what.
two friends or one friend that looks feminine and she looks masculine. It's just curious to witness that her animus is so angry. We men, we're not always angry. I hope.
Yeah, and the other characters in the movie are not that angry either.
Yes, good point.
Yeah.
Isn't she a mother?
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't that be the trauma? I mean, basically, she, in all the situations that you showcased, she's exacerbating animosity against male figures, and she feels diminished and frustrated. And it could be that the trauma is the new status of mother that changed her life, and that basically trapped her in a situation that she's not comfortable with, of being more, according to society, the more quiet mother, not so active as maybe she was in the past. And this feeling of being trapped activates things and puts forward, for instance, animus materials complexes that arrive balancing the situation, and so it appears as a permanent state of anger against others, and men in particular.
Well, the man part is interesting because this came out in the scene with the waiter, where she's like, well, the waiter thinks you're cute. There's this underlying thing going on through the whole movie, that where the other couples in the movie are like, well, he's gay. I mean, can't you just tell he's gay? Her husband, yeah. And so so it could be like she does and she doesn't want to consider that possibility about her husband, that he really is gay. And there are a few scenes in there where he does act really gay, I gotta say. The director...
At the end that he is.
No.
No?
No.
That's what I was going to ask. What is the final outcome?
I'll let you borrow the DVD, Conrad. We can't get into... I want to keep going here.
Can I follow up one thing, though? You talked about archetypes, energy, and organizing principles, right? Right?
Yes.
That's what I heard, right?
Right. Archetypes are ordering principles.
You said ordering?
Archetypes.
You said organizing earlier, but now
ordering and organizing, that's...
See, I guess what I would like to just kind of, a little bit of a dive into is it all seems rather noun-based, when all of this stuff is a verb.
Mm-hmm.
You say principles, but really it's a manifold, isn't it? Isn't it a manifold in a shepherd?
Okay, can we table this to the end, because I really would like to get through and get into some of the dynamism, the dynamics of it. And I think it's very important. I love thinking verb-based rather than noun-based, and I think once we get through some more of this, we'll, let's just get there. Okay, so we covered a lot of this already, that complex can become autonomous, kind of like a subpersonality that takes over temporarily. We saw that in her. She can be like calm and rational, and then and the complexes can also be grounded in Gebser's structures of consciousness: archaic, magic, mythic, mental, and probably even integral. They're fractal, so within the ego complex, at each of these various stages, this is John's diagram of the spiral of all the various structures. So you can have complexes, like if you get wounded when you're in, the magical phase of life, most likely the complex that gets created there will reflect your magical thinking. If you get wounded, at a very archaic phase, it will reflect the archaic. So just as complexes can be personal, they can also be transpersonal. There can be national complexes, there can be cultural complexes, there can be, global complexes. Indeed, right now we're kind of facing a bit of a global authoritarianism complex. So this schema, the Gebser 4 structures, 5, sorry, there we go. this is a very kind of mental way of characterizing something that isn't so cut and dry. You know, the complexes, as we saw, can be messy. But these, in some ways, what I'm trying to say here is that the consciousness structures, there's also like a mirroring with the unconsciousness structures, with complexes, ever-present complexes. So if Jung saw the complex as like an onion, a whole onion, with these structures, we can like start peeling back the layers, and we can see, peel back through mental, mythic, magic to, an archaic little core at the center. So now I'd like to share with you my father complex as a way of, getting into looking at these various structures within it. Okay, so I have it here too, because it's kind of hard to see on the screen.
Thank you for sharing this with us. I know that this is very personal, and I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, if it, I've been in workshops and things where when people do share their personal stuff, it's like the personal is the universal. So if you guys can get something from my father complex, God bless everybody. So I tried to kind of categorize them by color, but it's not really precise. But these are some of the things that my father has said and done that wounded me, and hence now I get triggered by them. And experiences with other people that kind of share these same meanings, constellate my father complex. So on top, in the kind of orange, there are statements that reflect like the king emperor archetype. This is my house, you will follow my rules. Going clockwise, the pink reflects a kind of serious about life senex. There's the puer senex polarity. At the bottom right, in red down there, you can see something of my father's scientist, inner scientist. Only what is measurable is real, and I'm a little too, mystical for him.
Her father's a PhD chemist.
Yeah. At the six, there's also something of a narcissist there. Then in the 6 o'clock position, there's the kind of self-made man. In the bottom left here, there's a bit of the golden boy, the perfect child, God's chosen, and Lisa, you're not. And then at 9 o'clock, I'm not really sure. I couldn't quite put a label on that one. But, if somebody other than my father would express such things to me, it would irk me. I would react. I don't like being discounted. And so you see these lines that connect? I put those in because all of these different things, they get associated with each other. And so this web of associations basically kind of strengthens the complex, holds it together. Yes.
If I may, Lisa, you said if someone else said something to you, it would irk you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But so when your father said it to you, it did what to you?
Well, because I could not because I might not even have known how I was feeling at the time. 2, I might not have been able to express how I was feeling because his anger would crush my anger. It got repressed. it got submerged into unconsciousness, which is why I wasn't able to deal with it at the time. So that when it gets constellated, it's like saying, deal with me, deal with me.
Is there any anger there?
Oh, hell yes.
Is it at all that he's the one that has the right to do that and nobody else does?
That's how he ran the family. Yeah, nobody.
But I mean, with you, that you don't get mad at him because that's his job. That's okay when he does it. But other people trying to do it, not only are they dissing you, but they're also taking over your father's role.
Yeah. It sucks. So I've also got, you can see elements of the archaic, magic, mythic in some of these. So archaic.
Did you color code before you met John or after?
I've been color coding since before I met John.
Okay.
This was not a
A
conversion
joint complex. That says something.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you like Lisa.
Good potential.
The color.
Birds of a feather,
She highlighted well.
A good risk.
Okay, so we've got archaic, like my anger will crush your anger. That's kind of in the archaic. I think I'm ashamed and embarrassed by you would also be archaic. Magic.
Now, shame wouldn't be archaic, I don't think.
Shame,
is
fear.
Yeah.
I think shame.
Fear, but shame is
Not too much self-consciousness.
reptilian
Yeah.
reaction.
Yeah.
Which is toward the archaic.
Okay, so
Shame is
The archaic is non-differentiated.
Yeah.
So that if we're talking, if archaic energies, we're talking about wild, crazy, uncontained created destructive creation.
So this is very interesting. So if it wouldn't be archaic because it's not reptilian,
I don't know what it would.
How would you label it?
Yeah, I don't know because
Shame
it's
is
complex.
Shame is a human species. Isn't
Yeah. Well, it's in the origin myth. I mean,
but it's not the dinosaurs, right?
No.
No, but you have to have a reflective consciousness.
Yeah, you have to have some
To feel
expectation
shame. You
of
have to have a
or self.
Yeah.
I mean, you in a sense you have to be. It's the sign of self-awareness.
Apparently in the Garden of Eden it was
Yeah.
the awareness of being naked
Yeah.
and the awareness of good and evil, knowledge of good and evil, came about simultaneously.
And what they
With
don't know
disobedience.
what you don't know won't hurt you. So you have to know that. In a sense, you have to objectify yourself before you can be ashamed.
Okay.
To take mythic approaches.
Yeah.
So it's not archaic, John. I mean, shame is not archaic.
All these topics we're talking about are vast topics.
Oh,
But,
sure.
Mario Jacobi says that shame is the basis of the rise of human consciousness.
Well, that's what Genesis is.
Which is what Genesis is saying. And if you have to know what is shame, let's dig through the
I
layers.
was just trying correlation of a label with a human feeling that is so primordial,
Yeah.
It's
So-
primordial.
But it's more It has more content to it, really, than I think of as at least.
I agree.
Well,
it's
although,
reactive, I agree.
although you don't control shame certainly, but
Children feel ashamed.
yeah, I mean, I think of
From very
wild
early-
anger as
But
more.
every person
Okay.
in this room could
What
tell
are
a
we
shame
looking for
story.
the meta archetype? I mean, the capstone archetype?
No.
What are we talking about then?
We're looking at
Or
how
maybe-
these
Because it's really
various
survival, isn't it, ultimately?
we're looking at how these various structures of consciousness map onto these aspects of my particular father archetype. So I've just kind of put labels on a few of these. Magic. You should go to church. Mythic over here of, girls just aren't capable. Ballet is not a serious profession. Mental, only what is measurable is real. Psychology is BS. Those are some of the lovely aspects of my father complex. Okay, but That's mine. When I was reading this book, Archetypes and Strange Attractors, the author, J.R. Van Inwick, gives this example of his father complex. So he had a mostly absent father, and so his father complex looks like this. It gets activated when the coach wouldn't put him in the game. He judges his teachers and other authority figures, like his father, as being inadequate. He sees his boss as, who's the father figure at work, as being uninterested in his work. And then, he went on to marry a spouse who is a workaholic, thereby transferring the father figure onto his wife.
That's very much me.
He says, my father complex is simply memories tied together by feelings that influence my perception. And I say, no, that conception does not account for the archetype at the nucleus. Okay, let's get through now. So this is a personal complex. The father complex is also cultural. In fact, you could say it started at the beginning. So indeed, why do we call them the founding fathers rather than, a lot of them were Episcopalians? Oh, where's Jeff? No.
Yeah, instead of the framers, right?
The founding brethren. Why weren't they brethren? That was more a what's that religion where they all sit in silence?
Quakers.
Quaker, yeah, that was a kind of a Quaker thing. But it goes back much further actually than these guys. It goes back to Kronos, who is probably the terrible father. He ate his children, and then there was Zeus, and then there was Yahweh, and it just kept happening in history over and over and over. Now, there's a really interesting study. The tyrannical omnipotence of the archetypal father. If anybody's interested, I can send you the link. But he goes into describing the whole Kronos myth through like movies, The Terminator and Star Wars. I won't be able. I'm not going to go into all that. I'll just let you look that up if you want to. What I want to go into is I like George Lakoff's work in The Political Mind. And he presents two different, I would call them national father complexes, which results in two different models of the family, which then get projected onto government. The one is a strict father family, which has a hierarchical structure, the king at the top, queen. This model, the world is a dangerous place. It's difficult. It's competitive. There are always winners and losers. There's absolute right and wrong, and I can tell you which is which. And children are born bad because they just do what feels good, not what is right, and so they have to be taught what is right. Makes sense? It's the way my father was. There is an element of protecting the family from a dangerous world, but also supporting the family in a difficult world. What is required of the child is obedience, because the strict father is a moral authority who knows right from wrong. Whereas in the nurturant parent family, he uses the word parent instead of nurturant father because it's in this type of structure, it's more gender neutral. We have a heterarchy here instead of a hierarchy. The nurturance has to do with empathy and responsibility. And so the father or parent in this situation believes that children are born good, but they can be made better. And that the world is basically good and can be made better. Parents who can empathize with their child provide protection as well. And I thought this was really interesting. He said, if you want your child to be fulfilled in life, to be a happy person, and if you are an unhappy, unfulfilled person yourself, you are not going to want other people to be happier than you are. That whoa, okay.
Jung said something like, if you see something you don't like in your child, look at yourself first. Right?
Yeah. Okay, so values, communication, community, cooperation, trust. I'm going to keep forging ahead here.
I'm sorry, Lisa, that was Lakoff? What's the name?
George Lakoff? Lakoff?
Yeah, that's his seminal.
Yeah. So Jung points out that as long as complexes are unconscious, we can have more associations, we can, do this sort of thing with them. They cast off the compulsive character of an automatism only when we raise them to consciousness, which he says is one of the most important elements of therapy. But here's the $64,000 question, if any of you are also old enough to remember that game show. And when that was a lot of money. And when that was a lot of yeah, right. So it was in a footnote in the Jacobi book where I started putting all these things together. So Jung interprets the ego as a reflection not of one but of very many processes. We saw that with John's little spiral diagrams. All of those processes and contents make up ego consciousness. Their diversity does indeed form a unity because their relation to consciousness acts as a sort of gravitational force, okay? Clue number one, drawing the various parts together towards what might be called a virtual center. Clue number two. For this reason, I do not speak simply of the ego, but the ego complex. Okay, so these two things had me think of the Lorentz attractor. There's kind of a virtual center that, there's kind of this gravitational force that attracts. So a little bit about Lorentz. He was a mathematician, trained and worked as a meteorologist in World War II, saw that atmospheric phenomena were not linear, and invented ways to just keep simplifying and simplifying and simplifying. Also realized he was working on one of these equations and decided to pick it up mid computation, but he didn't enter the numbers incorrect and in exactly the same way as he did the first time. He rounded them off, and it gave him a whole different output. And that's where he realized the sensitive dependence on initial conditions for these forms. So I'm hoping that this next video, which gives a really good example, I'm hoping this will work. If not, I do have it up on YouTube.
And what's the butterfly effect?
So it has to do with predictability. and that when you've got so many complex nonlinear systems, their predictability becomes more and more difficult. So it was named when he presented a paper that basically, and hopefully this video will explain it, the flapping of a butterfly's wings in Japan cause a tornado in Nebraska. I couldn't, yeah. Okay, we're gonna go straight to YouTube here.
Cells will get triggered into larger cells, so it permeates up from the bottom. Change comes from the smallest thing rather than.
Oh, shoot. Okay, here we go. Sorry.
Is the camera working off the internet also, Gregor?
Oh, you mean the microphone here?
So fine.
Yeah, I had to turn the internet off in order to get the PowerPoint to reboot. Okay, so here we go.
That latest book we were passing around, does someone have it?
Archetypes and strange attractors?
Yeah.
Strange
attractors. Can I?
How did you find that book?
Do you need it back?
How did I find it?
Oh, that's
It was in the Jung library?
Yeah.
I found it about 10 years ago when I was trying to figure out, just somebody was talking about the interaction of complexity science and strange attractors and where we came from, which is, he basically comes up with the book is no one has a clue where we came from or how we got here.
Okay, here we go. So, this video, let me just give you...
When we look at the movements of the atmosphere, we quickly realize that it is infinitely more complex than that of the solar system.
Okay, why isn't...
The atmosphere is a fluid that has, at each altitude above each point of the Earth's surface, a speed, a density, a pressure, a temperature, and so on.
Here, let me just...
All of this data varies over time. It is, of course, impossible to understand this practically infinite amount of data.
Some books sound
It is almost as if we were in a space with an infinite number of dimensions. To understand something about it, we must make approximations. In 1963, Edward Lorenz simplified and simplified and simplified the problem again. He simplified it to such a degree that there is no guarantee that his equation has anything to do with reality. His model of the atmosphere was reduced to just three numbers, x, y, and z. The evolution of the atmosphere was reduced to a simple equation. Each point, x, y, z, in space, represents a state of the atmosphere. The evolution follows a vector field. For example, and this is only an example, the first coordinate could represent the temperature, the second, the wind speed, and the third, the humidity. Over here, it is cold, breezy, and rainy. Here, the opposite holds.
Somehow it's gotten...
When we follow a trajectory of the field, we are following the evolution of the weather. Differential equation. This is what Lorenz saw when he studied his model. Does this have anything to do with real weather? That is far from clear. This is what physicists often call a toy model, used to try and understand the broad outlines of some complex behavior.
So let me just. No, I'm not going to pause it because that's going to screw everything up.
Because his computer in 1963 was quite primitive. Let's look at two atmospheres, represented by the centers of these two balls that are extremely close together.
Okay, so this is the sensitive dependence on initial conditions. They're not quite exactly the same.
Let's observe what happens to them. At first, the two evolutions are almost indistinguishable. But then, they split up significantly. The two atmospheres become completely different. This then is chaos, sensitive dependence on initial conditions. In 1972, Lorenz was going to present his work at a prestigious conference. But he was late in sending in the title of his lecture. The organizer, Philip Merlis, was in a hurry to send the program to the participants, so he chose a title for Lorenz. Predictability. Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? The butterfly effect was born. Mathematical concepts are often not well understood by the general public. The image of a small, frail butterfly having an influence on the world is very poetic. The idea was very successful and has been endlessly modified. There is always a butterfly, but sometimes it comes from Africa and sometimes from China. And it is responsible for disasters in New York or in Chicago. Interesting. The idea found its way into literature, music, and movies. The list of films based upon this idea is endless. It generates a lot of emotion in Babel, the 2006 film by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu. The insignificant incident of a gunshot in Morocco will change the lives of an American couple, a Mexican nursemaid, and a Japanese girl. An interplay of small causes and large consequences. How chance determines the fate of humans. Unfortunately, only one half of Lorenz's message made its way to the general public. Can chaos theory be limited to the statement that it is impossible to predict the future in practice? How could scientists resign themselves to such an admission of failure? Lorenz's message is much richer. Here are two trajectories of the Lorenz system. One blue and one yellow that do not start from very similar initial conditions. Let's erase, say, the first 10 seconds of the movement, and then let's observe what happens.
So watch the shape, as they rotate it in 3 dimensions.
They seem a little crazy and very unpredictable. But they accumulate on the same butterfly-shaped object. This accumulation does not seem to depend on the initial position. The trajectories seem to be attracted to this butterfly. This is what is referred to as the Lorenz attractor. A strange attractor. Here is a positive scientific phenomenon, one not as famous as the butterfly effect. Instead of observing just 2 trajectories, let's look at many more. Look at all these balls, each one of them representing a simplified atmosphere. After a while, they all accumulate on the same butterfly.
So notice how one feeds and then how they go back and forth, and sometimes circle a little in one and then go to the other, and circle a little and then go to the other.
These are real problems for mathematicians.
That's the main dynamic that I want you to get from this.
Instead of describing the future starting from a given initial position, which we know is impossible, we will instead try to describe the attractor. What does it look like? How do the internal dynamics work? In the 1970s, Berman, Guggenheimer, and Williams proposed a simple model for trying to understand the Lorentz attractor. Here's a strip of paper. Let's fold it, and cut it, and glue it together. And we have a special object in space. Let's go to the starting line. Instead of observing just two trajectories, here we go. We drive, and a little while later, we are back at the starting line. But we are at a different point of the starting line. From here, a new path starts. Our position on the starting line is given by a number x between 0 and 1. At 0, we are on the left. At 1/2, we are in the middle. And at 1, we are on the right. If we start from the point x, then we will return to the point 2x if x is smaller than 1/2. And we will return to the point 2x minus 1 if x is larger than 1/2.
Don't worry about the numbers right now.
In other words, when the car moves, the points where it meets the starting line are doubled at every turn, except we need to subtract 1 if the result is greater than 1.
Okay, I think...
It's a bit like the horseshoe. The dynamics and...
Okay, I'm gonna stop this here because I really want to get to the punchline. But you see the way that it'll spiral around one for a while and then go to the other and spiral around the other. So think of those as two different systems.
Can you describe what that moment in time, that atmosphere, like the simulation that we keep seeing? Can you give me like an image or something that makes more sense to me? Because I'm lost when it comes to like each one of those dots. They said it's like it represents an atmospheric phenomena or something like that. But what does that mean?
Yeah, I wanted you to get the weather where this structure was created. It was created out of weather systems. But now we're going to take it and apply it to human systems.
So on that model, it was just like an atom or something like that?
Those were three parameters in weather.
Yeah.
In mathematics would be a principal component that were in this example wind temperature and the humidity, and as explaining most of the system, the weather system. And so it was mapping the evolution of this parameter on those three axes and how they change when weather change. That's what we saw. So the motion is the change of those parameters.
Okay.
You have different databases.
Right. So the axes that that we're going to look at here, the up, down, east, west, okay, each axis is a polarity. I'm saying this one is the self-other polarity. This is the feeling-doing polarity. And this one is the conscious-unconscious polarity. So complexes involve self and other. There's always, you don't have a complex just on your own. It's in the interactive field. They involve the feeling tone. The constellations involve some behavior. That's the feeling doing. And the conscious and unconscious, so when the unconscious erupts into our feelings and behaviors, we can become more or less conscious of what is happening, of what we are doing. So in the early scenes of the movie clips, Jane was not conscious at all of what she was doing. And she really never became truly conscious of it, but, we could see her kind of getting closer. So the conscious aspects that can be easily pointed to, like she always gets annoyed with waiters. And then the unconscious aspects are like the seeds of the complex, and it takes some work to dig those up. But fortunately, I'll show you how they show themselves in a mirroring that happens. So let me show you, we've got a little bit of time here. Let me show you another complex from my own life. So here's our three-dimensionality, okay? And we've got two systems. We've got the current relationship, and then we've got a past relationship, which usually is a family of origin, but it doesn't have to be. So for me, in the self side of feeling, I have feelings of being excluded, rejected, and ignored. So this again is like relationships that I've had with men. After the honeymoon phase of the relationship is worn off and it's settling into stability, I start projecting into the relationship that I don't matter, and often some event triggers it, like being excluded from a gathering, being ignored at the holidays, being treated by, as persona non grata. I start feeling excluded, rejected, and ignored, and unworthy of the other's affection. So, and I might be totally conscious of what I'm feeling. So that's why it's on the kind of the conscious side. Only after, I do some introspection do I realize, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So this is all still in the current relationship. Something triggers, like the not being included in the holidays, triggers the emotion, and I discharge the energy in the doing field. A lot of times what I do is I preemptively reject the other person. I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm moving. Usually after that, I start thinking to myself, well, okay, what's going on here? What happened? Think back to, my family situation where I felt the same way. I could tell you stories galore from my family where I felt excluded, rejected, and ignored. And so this sets up kind of, that dynamic going in a circle, like in the Lorenz attractor. We're going on one side, going round and round. Then if I let me just skip ahead here. So to the extent that I'm conscious then of also feeling rejected, excluded and ignored in both situations, both from my family and from the current relationship. So dealing, allowing the unconscious brings it into consciousness. And I'm no longer like unconsciously, preemptively rejecting. I'm conscious of what I'm doing. Okay, let me just, I'm kind of worried about the time, so I'm getting ahead of myself here. So to the extent that my parents didn't necessarily express their true feelings verbally, but children nevertheless, still in participation mystique and unable to differentiate themselves from the parents, co-experience the feeling, for example, of rejection, but misplace the attribution. So it's, for example, not mommy is rejecting me, but I am rejecting me. That might result in a more severe complex. But with my family system, which is the gray elements, there's a kind of mirror system that's set up on the primary axis of self-other with similar feelings and doings. So when I'm feeling, one way in my current relationship, there's a mirror to my family relationship. Okay? Indeed, I feel the same way. Okay, I said that already. So, my family, for example, they didn't even invite me to family reunions. They didn't even tell me family reunions were happening. They showed me pictures later. And I started realizing that I particularly didn't want to be around them. And that was the big aha in this whole complex. That if I am honest with myself, okay, I consider them, I'm judging them to be unworthy of my time and attention, okay? Now, consciously, I thought I was being a really decent, dutiful, good daughter, despite the friction in the relationship with my parents. But once I admitted to myself that, yes, I was just as rejecting of them as I thought they were rejecting of me, I could then see how the unconscious rejection of my parents mirrors the more conscious rejection of my significant other. But, kind of temporally opposite. So, having been rejected by them, let me count the ways, although they would deny it, because they're kind of still unconscious of their rejection. My rejection was not preemptive, but reactive. So here's the pattern I discerned. Here's the punchline to this joke I've been telling for the last 2 hours. So what I'm feeling in the current relationship, which is, rejected, which is obvious, which is a projection, is the conscious manifestation of what I'm unconsciously doing in the relationship with my parents. So let me say that again. What I'm feeling in the current relationship is the conscious manifestation of what I'm unconsciously doing in my originary relationship, the one where the complex kind of got created. Yeah. So by seeing this whole dynamic, fortunately, it kind of blew the complex out of the water for me. I still reject my parents. I still don't like hanging around with them. But I'm conscious of doing it, okay? And I don't preemptively reject my current relationship anymore, and I don't have all those feelings of being excluded, even though the reality is the same. I'm not as captured by this complex as I used to be, by seeing that kind of double mirroring between feeling and doing, and between current relationship and past relationship. So that's it.